Okay, I think we're going to get started. Like I say, we're expecting a bumper audience today. I know we had over 200 people register, which is fantastic. But whilst people log on, we will get things started. So just some quick introductions first and foremost. My name is Michael Tigwell. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Benefex. Ultimately, that means I support all of the frontline customer delivery teams. So everything from our call center to our customer success teams and a couple of our technical delivery teams. So this is the latest in our series of customer success webinars that we're running. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Charlotte, and I'll let Charlotte introduce herself.
Great, thanks Michael, and good morning everybody. So I'm Charlotte Godley, and as head of proposition for Benefex, it's my role really to make sure that what we provide and what we deliver to our customers is in line with sort of current and the sort of future market demands and trends. So it's actually been extremely interesting looking through some of the this data from OneHub to see whether what we have perhaps been thinking would have happened with benefits over the last sort of 12 to 18 months has actually come through. So it's great to have the opportunity to share and discuss that with you.
Yeah, and that's a perfect sort of tee in just to explain the context for today's session. So at Benefex, we're conscious that we sit on this mountain of data that gives us really good insight into what employees are doing on our platform and what benefits they're engaging with. So we had this idea about surfacing some of the trends aligned with some of the insights that Charlotte will provide. To get an understanding about how the landscape has changed over recent months. Now, I think it's fair to say, you know, it's a bit of a Pandora's box. It's literally opened up thousands of different avenues that we could have gone down. So today is definitely, we're seeing as a Kickstarter for further conversations for you to have with your consultants or your CSDs, but hopefully, you know, some interesting nuggets in here. Just to get us started, before we dive into some of the specific data points, I think it's fair to say, and Charlotte probably won't mind me saying this, but we both have over 20 years experience in the employee benefits market. I don't think we've had a 12 or 18 months quite like the one we've all just been through. And interestingly, you know, for us, whilst it hasn't necessarily changed the things that we're talking to our customers about, it's definitely put some of those things into sharper focus. So we've put, I guess, what we see from a Benefex point of view as the four big drivers in terms of HR challenges and reward challenges over the next 12 months. Now, just to make sure that our understanding is aligned with what you guys are feeling, there's going to be a poll that pops up on your screen where we're going to ask whether you agree that these four things are things you're thinking about right now, or whether we've got completely wrong. And if you think it's something else, really happy for people to drop their thoughts into the chat. But whilst you do that, I'll just ask Charlotte to elaborate a little bit more about the themes that are on this slide here.
Yeah, and probably not a surprise to anybody that employee wellbeing sits at the top of that. It's definitely been a real focus that we were seeing, to be honest, going into the pandemic, but definitely escalated throughout 2020. I think it's also fair to say that you know, we haven't sort of probably scratched the surface in terms of seeing the impact of you know, the pandemic and lockdowns on employee wellbeing as a whole. So I think when it comes to benefits, I think we've seen that traditionally, I suppose benefits are more focused on those the sort of short-term well-being benefits like your private medical insurance, etc. And we've seen sort of certainly more a shift towards the more preventative well-being tools, and we expect that to probably continue. Cost and value, again, probably not a surprise to any of you that came up, and I think that's both from the employer perspective as well as from employees. So obviously not only have a number of organisations been hit by the pandemic, but also a lot of individuals have had, if not their own finances adversely impacted, but certainly often those of their family. And again, we've seen sort of benefits coming to the fore that are looking at some of those financial well-being areas for individuals, but also we've seen a lot of our customers looking at, what is it that we're providing? Are we really getting value from those benefits, and how do we make sure we get better value from those? Just to briefly touch on the others, I mean, so, just mindful of time as well, I could probably talk about these for a long time, but sustainability, again, I think is from both areas. That appears in pretty much every annual account now, on every website. And we're hearing more and more that exec pay is being linked closely to those ESG goals, as well as, I think, as for ourselves, right? I think we all saw the positive impact of us all being locked down, the positive impact that did have on our environment and nature, as well as, I think, some of our communities coming closer together as we were sort of helping each other out, who were perhaps isolating, etc., because of COVID. I think the diversity and inclusion one is definitely not a new thing, but again, much more front of mind following campaigns such as sort of Black Lives Matter, Me Too, discussions around gender dysphoria, and plus areas like menopause and fertility. So I think it's just the fact that it's just really important that reward and benefit strategy supports this, and that we bear those in mind. So I think that it's kind of I think it's a really exciting time for benefits. I don't think there's been really a significant shift in the way benefits offered really since Flex first came to being in the late 1990s, other than a few benefits like car salary sacrifice and cycle to work, etc. And in some ways we probably see less choice than we used to in some of those online benefit schemes. So but we're now sort of seeing this emergence of a kind of new generation of benefits really that fit around these themes.
Yeah, and I think that's clearly reflected in people's responses. Hopefully you can see that on the screen, that to a large degree all four of the themes that we're hearing loud and clear from our customers seem to be reflected across the wider group. And I think that's a really good point that you make, Charlotte. I think the difference is, given the challenges around health and well-being, diversity and inclusion in the workplace, people are starting to look at benefits as a strategic tool to address some of those issues, where I think before it's always felt like we were fighting to have a voice at the strategic table, as it were.
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
Well, that's reassuring that we are on the right lines with this webinar, and it has been taught you 100% none of the above, so we will carry on. Okay, next we were going to look slightly broader strokes again before we get into the detail, around what are the top new benefits, or benefits we're seeing have something of a resurgence or becoming really popular, that perhaps didn't figure as much if you look at 2020 and definitely beyond 2020 in terms of popularity and prevalence when it comes to benefit programs. Do you just want to provide a summary, Charlotte, on what we've seen and how these have moved and the benefits they've replaced?
Yeah, and I think car salary sacrifice for me has been a really great one over the last year. We've seen a lot more customers introduce this, and the take up you'll see as we show some slides later on has really increased. And I think again this is just a benefit, as some of the others listed here are, that it's really a reflection, I suppose, of what is happening in the consumer market that is now coming into benefits, which I think is great and kind of reflects that merging of the home life and the work life that we've all seen, I think, since the beginning of last year. I mean, the car salary sacrifice ticks those boxes of sustainability and financial well-being, in that obviously electric cars, they've seen a huge increase just in the general market, something like 140% over last year, when sort of sales of cars in general were down. So it ticks that sort of environmental aspect, but also the savings that you can make as an individual through the benefit in kind tax, as well as actually as the employer through the national insurance savings. I think it also ticks that sort of cost and value bucket as well there. And And I think the other areas has been very much around the well-being, you know, the financial well-being with loans and the ISAs, with more companies offering those. And also all of those things that are available, right? All of the new apps that have come in, and tools that support particularly, you know, the physical health with the, you know, digital GP, with EAPs that we've seen a lot of movement in, and also those home workouts, right, that have sort of gone through the roof. So it very much reflects, I think, as I say, that consumer market, and that's a trend that we're very much seeing in the market as well. And you know, our marketplace team who look at our provider partnerships have got a longer list than I think they've ever had before of sort of new providers and benefits coming to the market, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of physical and financial wellness heavy. I think car salary sacrifice probably worth calling out. I don't know if we've got anyone from EDF on the call, but EDF are a great example around how they use car salary sacrifice to reflect their wider corporate green agenda. So, you know, you'll see the adverts for EDF on TV. It's all about sustainability, green energy. So being able to provide, you know, a green car option to their employees just chimes perfectly with, you know, their focus as an organization right now. And I think it's fair to say that the feedback we had from their car salary sacrifice provider was probably the most successful launch they've ever seen in terms of take up and it resonating with their employees. So a really good example of how it can you know, help in terms of that perception in the wider market. Do you think that things like loans, as a probably more controversial example, is that a concerning sign that we're seeing that come to the fore, or is it a positive step?
Well, you know, there's this balance, isn't there, with loans, and I know that the customers that we speak to often have sort of mixed views about these. It's whether, you know, you don't want to be seen to encourage people to go into debt by taking out a loan. What these are really there for is to help people to consolidate their debt, and therefore to end up paying less off in terms of their interest rates. I really do believe, and a lot of the feedback we get is that actually loans that are offered through payroll deduction do that secondary piece, because, you know, and we'll see as we go through some of the detailed data as we go on, that actually loans are quite popular with those on the lower at the lower end of the salary, and often those people find it hard to get a well-priced loan or credit cards or whatever themselves because maybe of their credit rating, whereas by offering this through a payroll deduction, they're getting a much better rate and they're much more likely to be accepted for these types of loans. So I think whilst I understand that view that is it encouraging people to get into debt, I think the large majority know it isn't encouraging them, and actually it's helping people to manage their finances. So actually it's positive that people are engaging with those types of benefits that can help them in the longer term.
And we've had a question from Emma about the future of salary sacrifice, and I think it's definitely one of those things that's been under the spotlight and on the government agenda for the past few years. And clearly there's been a reduction in the amount of benefits that now qualify for tax relief under the SALSAC rules. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there were future changes afoot. It's something we obviously monitor very closely, but in terms of specifics, nothing specific to share right now. But yeah, always something we'll keep a close eye on.
Yeah, and I think those that are left within that salary sacrifice piece, I suppose pension apart, arguably, are also fitting with the government's agenda, aren't they, in terms of that sort of sustainability. So where they tick that box as well, like the car salary sacrifice and obviously cycle to work, they are aligned. So I'm hopeful that it won't be looked at again in the near future.
So moving on, next slide is a little bit about, you know, the activity we've seen in our platform. You know, I think it's fair to say that on OneHub we see very high levels of engagement anyway compared to similar platforms. But also when you factor in that because of all the changes, because of everything that was happening in the world, we saw a marked increase in engagement in 2020 itself. You know, having been through what for us is a peak time between January and April in terms of enrolments, the data's saying that upward trend is continuing, which it is great to see, but I'm quite interested in understanding what we think's driving that, Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, I was really encouraged to see this, really encouraged to see these increases. I think that, that there's a part of me that was thinking, are people going to be less engaged because they're more worried about their finances? They're not going to want to go in. They're not going to look at benefits because they've got, other things they're worrying about. But what this really shows to me is what we all want it to show, right? Which is that actually benefits are supporting the employees, right? And that's where employees go when they need to have some support, particularly around those sort of health and the financial well-being piece. So I think I think all of that is great. I think we probably all were thinking a little bit last year, what would happen? What really would happen if I was really ill or sadly passed away because of COVID? What would that mean to my family? And actually, what would it mean to me if I lost my job, for this reason? So I think because of those, maybe it put a little bit more, it got us all thinking a little bit more about the sort of protection that we have in those areas and what we would do, as I say, and I think that really helped with the engagement. But we also saw a lot more communication, right? So I think we saw that across the board, didn't we, across our customers, that where it might not be putting new benefits in, and that what we did see is a lot more focus on communication, so that employees were actually aware of the value, not just what benefits were available, but actually the value of those benefits. And what I think made a real difference was the how those benefits fit in to a broader well-being strategy to really help the employees understand why they might take up some of these benefits, and also just what their employer is offering to them.
And actually, I had a customer challenge, I guess a long-held view that I had, which, we always think about engagement being people selecting benefits and, engaging with them and using them lots. And we had a customer whose business was going through a very difficult time through the pandemic. And actually, they were seeing lots of employees deselect benefits that they didn't think were sort of important for them at that time. And I raised that as whether that should be something of a concern for them. And their challenge back was actually, this kind of proves the advantage, or, why we would offer a flexible plan in the first place. It gives employees the option, when the world gets turned on its head, to actually say, what, right now I'd rather have the cash in my salary. So even though they were deselecting certain things, again, the fact they had that option, I think for this customer in particular was definitely seen as a positive. And I think that deselecting a benefit in normal times, I think we would all probably think is a bad thing, but I think it's just a completely different lens we're viewing the world through now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just to build a little bit more in terms of what we see in terms of benchmarking activity from a industry and sector level, in terms of the differences we see and the gaps on this page between people engaging. So engaging means people logging on, viewing their benefits, and the number of selections. Can you sort of draw any conclusions from this graph?
So I think it's a difficult one, this graph, in a way. I mean, you don't see huge variances between sectors, and I think that you said at the very beginning, Michael, this is kind of our first cut at high level data, if you like, but what tends to impact, I think, some of these markers more is actually the type of job role. So for example, you look at energy and utilities, and I have to admit I was quite surprised that this looked lower than some of the others, but I think that when you look at the makeup of the populations within those industries, it's very diverse and very different, right? So within those businesses, and there may well be some of you on the call that might want to comment in the chat on this, but those that are in those office-based roles, we do generally see a higher take-up, and it's maybe the field-based where you see a lower take-up. So I think that this gives us some idea, but actually there's a lot more I think that we could dig into in terms of roles that might give us sort of some more interesting statistics, if you like. But I do think that one of the things I do want to talk about here is obviously that difference between the engagement and then the people selecting. And I think, at first glance, you think, oh, it's sort of on average of a 30% difference between those two. And is that something that we should worry about? But actually, think about this, and most benefits will roll forward. So you don't have to go in and select them. And that's a good thing, right? Because believe me, I have seen schemes where they don't roll forward, and it can be an administrative nightmare, as well as, cause problems with, insurances and pre-existing conditions and all the rest of it. So you're always going to see that gap. It's right that you would see that, you would see that gap in there. So I think that engagement piece is the better sort of, I suppose, goal to look at in terms of whether or not a scheme is successful. But it does also suggest, I think, that keeping the scheme fresh is also important. So when people do go on, even if it's a change to look and feel, if it's a change to some of the content, or there's new content, as well as keeping it fresh with new benefits and tools, I think that is still important, so that you've got people going on to it. Let's make sure that there's things in there that they'll be interested in.
And how often would you recommend that, say, people survey their employees so they can understand, is it because actually the benefits you offer just aren't resonating, or whether it's, I made my selections last year and I'm quite happy with what I've got again, so they're just going to roll over?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at least the once a year, we've got the survey on OneHub actually as a tool, which we do get fairly good take up of. So we can also look at tailoring. You could look at tailoring the questions on that if it's something that anybody particularly wanted to look at. So I do think that's important to do. But you'll also know that for a lot of you, when your consultants and your CSDs are looking at the stats, they'll look at the number of people who've actually taken a benefit up, which can be a sort of statistic that can help more, because as long as people are taking at least one benefit, even if they do roll it forward, it shows that having that choice is still relevant. I think the other piece for me, just briefly on this bit, is, you look at these levels of engagement and they're really good. It's sort of average of 65-70% of people are going in, and this is only an annual enrolment. It's worth saying that, whereas a lot of schemes now, because there's anytime benefits, you're getting great engagement throughout the year as well. But with that level of engagement, it definitely demonstrates that to host things on this site, you've got this captive audience. If you are doing something else, broader around well-being, or broader against any of these areas that we've talked about, then to host that content on the benefits platform is a great way to do it, because people are already going in, right? So I think bringing it all together, that for me, this just demonstrates the value of doing that all in one place.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the people on the webinar today, if your industry or sector isn't on here and you're interested to know how you benchmark it, we've got all of this data. Like I say, it's a bit of a rabbit hole once you start diving into it. But speak to your consultant, speak to your CSD, and they can provide the necessary insight for you. So in terms of looking at some of the benefits at a very specific level, we've obviously pulled the data to see if there's anything significant in terms of upwards or downwards trends. Some of these will be obvious, some are probably less so, but can you just talk us through this slide?
Yes, of course I can. And we've split these ones into two, just so that there's another one coming on this, just because there's so many benefits that we could show, and we're still not showing all of them. I think when we look at these, I think that sort of one of the things we need to bear in mind is that we are only just, hopefully, coming out of lockdown, and hopefully then staying out of lockdown. So I think it's reasonable to expect that there's still, some of that uncertainty about the future and about what people are doing. So as I say, the fact that we've seen, as I said earlier, this sort of continued increase in the uptake of the benefits, and a steady increase in that, I think is actually really, really encouraging. Actually, I think you'll see from this, we've kind of seen a general increase across the board. The ones that have seen a reduction are probably not a surprise to anybody. So holiday trading I think that's going to be tube, because we still are not 100% clear on whether we're going anywhere this year or not. So I think you've probably got less people who are buying holiday, although I expect that may well change. Also, a lot of our customers opened up additional holiday windows last year to either encourage people to take more holiday, or in fact to let people sell holiday when they had bought it sort of at the beginning of the previous year. So I think that will have impacted holiday. Gym membership, fair enough, that's gone down. I'm hoping it will go back up. I think it will be interesting to see what happens with the gym membership benefit, actually, because so many people invested in home equipment and have got used to doing their home workouts. We'll see whether the sort of social side of going to the gym will encourage people back. I know I cannot wait. I've got my first class since going back tonight, and I can't wait to get back there personally. Although my equipment is still sitting there, not having been used for a while in the garage. So that one, yeah, so we're expected decrease. As I say, personal accident actually was the one that I have no explanation for. I don't know why that's dropped just in the last month. It might just be the mix of people we've got making selections at that time. But I think overall, as I say, it's encouraging to see that the benefits have retained the levels of take up that we've seen before.
I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit around holiday trading, where we've seen the biggest change, and you touched on holiday sale. So bearing in mind, you know, the well-being aspect and people taking more time off, and then obviously there is a cost and value impact in terms of, you know, the savings for employers offering holiday purchase. Do you think holiday sell is an effective tactic in the current climate, and something that should be offered by a caring employer?
So it's a very good question, and I think it should be offered, and you'll see why maybe when we talk through some of the latest stats in terms of maybe the engagement at different levels. I think, you know, I understand that, and we did see customers take out and not allow holiday sale last year who had done that before, because of those reasons you said, Michael, the well-being aspect, but also the fact that it costs the company a fair bit because it's sort of salary roll as well as the national insurance implications. But I think it is good because, you know, within and actually to the point that Emma made earlier when she was talking about the sort of salary sacrifice piece, that often there's less choice now in some ways. There might be more benefits we can offer, but actually in terms of being able to flex our company provided benefits, it's actually less choice now than there used to be. But holiday sell is one of those that you can still do. So for those people who do need additional cash, they can do it by selling holiday. So I do think it's relevant. I think for many companies, though, what I've seen work well is if you allow a higher level of holiday buy than holiday sell, so that you're never in you are less likely to then fall into a negative overall position in terms of those two.
Okay, great. Sorry, I appreciate it. I was putting you on the spot somewhat.
All good.
And then looking at some of the areas in which we have seen, you know, probably going back to that first slide around new benefits having, you know, something of an increase in interest is reflected on this slide. What would you pick out here as being particularly prevalent?
So, well, car salary sacrifice is the one that probably really stands out, and we talked about that one earlier. Also, cycle to work. Many of the customers since we, you know, that cap of £1,000 was relaxed, we've seen a lot of people increase that maximum level on cycle to work. And again, people are buying electric bikes. I think there is still going to be some caution about using public transport as we move, as we, you know, sort of open up again in terms of opening up offices. I know that for me, I live in North London, and people I know around here who have been going into offices in London, they're all driving or they're using the electric bikes. A load of them have bought electric bikes to get into work, and they're all expecting to continue to do that, actually, rather than going back onto sort of packed commuter trains and tubes. So I think those benefits will continue to hold their own and probably continue to increase. But I think, the other piece for me is, the ISAs and the loans that we talk, loans not on the ISAs is really encouraging to see. So again, that's not a benefit that I would say common, if you like, to offer, but we're getting a lot more interest in offering ISAs just to support, I suppose, the savings and financial well-being. I think the increase we've seen there has perhaps been due to people being a little bit more cautious and maybe being more sensible than me and saving some of the money they're not spending on commuting, rather than spending it on online shopping, as I seem to have been doing. So I think that's really encouraging. And I think we'll see a lot more organisations offering ISAs or alternative saving plans alongside pension. So yeah, and I guess the other pieces are just carbon offsetting. We're seeing more entrants in the market there, and we've seen that have a big increase, fits alongside that sustainability piece. But restaurant discount card, we haven't been able to go out, so that's gone right down. But again, I'd expect that to go up now things are opening up again.
And Emma's asked a really good question actually around cycle to work in the future, given that there's likely, or evidence suggests, a big shift towards home working. So in terms of people being able to demonstrate that they use that bike for commuting purposes, it does create I guess a little bit of a grey area there.
It does. A really good point again, Emma, and you'll know that sort of the government had been slightly lenient in terms of the rules around that during lockdown, but it's something that I know that the providers in that industry are continuing to talk to the government about to try to get those guidelines maybe a little loosened in terms of what that actually means for people.
Yeah, and I think it's worth sort of saying anecdotally as well, bearing in mind I also look after the call centre teams. In terms of cancelled orders, so people selecting a benefit and then retracting that selection, cycle to work is probably our biggest area. And right now that's being driven by a lack of availability of bikes, to be perfectly honest. I know, having just ordered one for my daughter and it taking 4 months to be built, that actually that is something that we're keeping a close eye on, is availability of the stock in the first place. So something definitely worth to discuss with your chosen provider to make sure they do have stocks. But again, really interesting, this kind of shift towards people protecting their financial futures, and then the protection element with things like wheel writing, and of course a sustainability element too. I think the period of self-reflection I think we all went through last year really resonates through this slide.
Yeah, and I think for me, I love this because some of these benefits, the take up has traditionally been quite low. So to see it sort of doubling on some of these really does show there is value in offering those, even though I know that for some of you, when you might look at stats after your enrolment, you see, 2% take up, is it worth doing? I think the answer is it definitely is. And it's likely that those benefits will, as I say, see an increase in the take up.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just conscious about time, and I know that the next one is slightly a more chunky and potentially controversial subject. So I'm really keen to get into that now. So I guess we're starting with the solution to this problem. So when we dove into the data, one of the things that sprung to mind was the need for effective communications, and to really think about the audiences you're trying to reach. And we'll explain why this real, I mean, it rings true. We believe this because of what we do, but the data was definitely a bit of a lightning bolt, and said, what, it's even more important than we've probably considered before. So in terms of the first data set that got us thinking was how we looked at the gender split, so gender engagement with benefits. And I guess what was concerning and interesting in equal measure is the fact that there does appear to be a difference with the benefits and how the genders engage with each of those. Charlotte, do you want to pick out the bits that really sort of jumped off this this slide for us.
Yeah, sure. And I guess to explain it, those ones, if it's not clear, the you've got female and male, female being the green, male blue, as it does say, but then the lines to the left are those where the take up is less than expected, looking at the proportion of male and females across our population, and the right hand side of those where the take up is higher. I also will just quickly say that obviously aware we're just talking male female, and then I was talking about diversity and inclusion as being a really key point, and we know now that there's sort of, you know, much more of a move to add you know, sort of different categories into gender. We would love to do that, but at the moment I think it's fair to say the insurance market only recognises these two, so we need to report data in this way, but we're hoping that will obviously change in the near future. But if we look at trends on this, so what is obvious at first glance is that women actually sort of lag behind in terms of the take up, and I think reasons for that, it sort of pains me to say it as it probably pains some of you to hear it, but I think some of this is going to be down to salary levels, right? So women do still generally earn less than men. It's probably also more likely that male partners will be in work and will be in jobs that are more likely to offer employer benefits. So I think you have those two. But I think that if you look at the take up for women, to be honest, they do fit into the sort of stereotype a little bit, I suppose, because you've got, you know, holiday. Okay, so it's often the woman who is still the one that takes the large part of responsibility for any childcare, so probably takes the holiday to fit in with school holidays. And then there's also some of those protection ones like will writing and critical illness, maybe protecting the family should anything happen. But it's good to see, I think, you know, health cash plan, the fitness and nutrition, so that's the sort of DNA fit benefit, and also the beauty and fitness card, so the discounts does show that you know, women like the ones where the benefits where they're looking after themselves as well as the protection piece. But I think it does, you know, and actually particularly because we've also heard that women have been adversely impacted by the pandemic, particularly financial. It would have been nice to have seen a higher participation with women in some of those financial products, and it does, to me, make me think we need to think about segmented communications, maybe for women. Yeah, so I think that was the main piece that sort of stood out for me in terms of this slide.
Yeah, I think that whole unconscious bias piece, you know, we definitely discussed at length. You know, is there something in the way that we communicate that means this resonates with the males more than females? You know, is it those gender stereotypes, or is it something else? But you know, I don't think we have any hard and fast answers or silver bullets for this, but I think it's definitely a major point for people to reflect on. And it sort of rings true as we look at sort of the different demographics through organizations as well. So we went on from that point to look at salaries and how those people that earn more, you know, potentially engage more, you know, with their benefits, and I guess where, you know, those potentially on lower salaries or even higher salaries lag behind, and the reasons why that is. What conclusions did you draw from this, Charlotte?
Well, I think it's not surprising that those at the lower end probably don't take up as many benefits as those at the sort of mid and higher end of the salary range, just because they don't have the same level of disposable income, and cash is king. And that comes back to that point I was making about holiday sale, that actually that can be really, really important and make a huge difference to somebody in terms of their take-home pay. So where you can offer benefits like that, where you can take cash out, I think that's really, really important. And to the point that you made earlier, Michael, when you were talking about the customer who had been talking about deselection, but saying that's really valuable, I think that's the same with benefits. You know, it's true that when you're earning less, it's a huge benefit, a huge advantage for you to be able to maybe reduce some of those benefits in order to free up some cash. So and I think that's reflected, we're seeing more, aren't we? I mentioned earlier about the ISAs, but that, the workplace savings, which I know, was a sort of big theme, and then went away a little bit because of auto enrolment, where it was felt you're obviously a bit more restricted with what you can do with pension contributions. But we're having a lot more discussions with people now about bringing that back in and saying, what can we do with pension contributions and maybe the employer contribution side of that, which I think is really interesting. So probably not entirely surprised, but what I thought was great, particularly looking again at that lower salary levels, is actually there is engagement with those benefits that are maybe saving money. So we talked about the loans a bit, but we've got technology spreading the cost across 12 months, something that shouldn't be taken lightly. That's a huge benefit to people and means they can actually afford things they wouldn't otherwise be able to. And obviously then again, that sort of beauty and fitness discount, which take up across the board is low, but for this population it's clearly important.
And someone's asked a really good question actually around the salary loans, the payday advances, and I think that prevalence of loans in those being paid under £30,000, on face value is definitely a concern. So the question is, what's our opinion on it? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? And I think it kind of goes back to that point is, it depends on your outlook. We speak to lots of customers who feel like it's potentially encouraging borrowing, and people might choose to borrow money that they wouldn't they wouldn't do in normal circumstances, and it feels like it's crossing a bit of a line in terms of employer-employee responsibility. On the flip side, you have those that say, it's a fact of life. Some people are really going to struggle when it comes to debt and debt management, and providing a facility where interest rates are reasonable, they're guaranteed access, is actually a good thing. And it's difficult to make a ruling who's right or wrong, because we definitely see both sides of the argument. I think Benefex's role in this is typically we play devil's advocate just to make sure that it's the right fit, that it chimes with what the business wants to stand for and achieve ultimately. So yeah, I know that's sitting on the fence a little bit, but
and I think and I do agree. I mean, I think that payday loans, though, I think are something a little bit different. I do think if you have a lot of demand for those, then maybe it's a case of look at your reward strategy as a whole, and how much people are being paid for what they do, as well as then do we then need to do anything to help them out. But I think the sort of broader payroll deduction loans, as you say, Michael, you could sit either way on those. Personally, I would say they're a good thing, looking at some of the interest rates that people have to pay across loans and credit cards, etc.
Right, I know that we're approaching time, and we've clearly bitten off more than we can chew with this topic. But again, it kind of reflects the fact that there's so much to go through. We'll carry on for the next sort of 5 minutes or so, make it to the end of the deck. But if anyone does need to drop off, then completely understand. And if anyone's got any questions that we haven't answered yet, we'll make sure we get to those, or come back to you after the session. Okay, following on from salary, we looked at age profiles, and again, similar vein, Charlotte, what would you pick out of here as interesting?
Yeah, again, I mean, it's probably not surprising, though, to be honest, that at the younger end and then the older end, you do get sort of slightly less engagement, and it's that sort of 30 to 50-year-old that are probably the best catered for. I would just say there's a lot of benefits that are coming into the market that I think appeal to those younger people, and I think I would also say, just repeat some of the things we said about the low salary as well. I think that they fit together. But for me, what this really suggests is that to really get your benefit strategy right, we need to really look at demographics, right? We need to look at these. It's really interesting seeing the differences across the ages. And I think for our customers, so for those of you on the call, it's about understanding not just your demographic now, but actually it's about what do we need, for the business in order for us to meet our business goals. So, for example, a lot of customers we talk to are really sort of focusing on that digitalization. So does that mean you've got different skill sets? Does it mean you've got different types of people coming in? Who do you need to recruit into the business? Who do you need to retain? And do your benefits fit with that? Because we're seeing a shift. I think there's been a shift in demographic people have been talking about for a long time. 5 generations, people working till they're older, etc. But I think if we can really look at it against your business goals and what it is you're looking to achieve, then as I say, we can really make sure that we're designing benefits that really hit the mark, and in fact pushing the market as well to develop those benefits that you can offer.
And I would say it doesn't quite pick it up on this slide, but I know we have data elsewhere around employer paid benefits. I think assuming that you know what people want is fairly dangerous. I think particularly during lockdown one of the things that struck us was the number of people in younger demographics phoning us with questions around their protection benefits, whether that's to increase them or with general questions. And for us, it really started to dispel that myth that, hey, if you're under 30, you don't care about life assurance or pension or these types of things, because that's not always the case. And unless you ask people and engage with them, it's quite a dangerous assumption to make. Okay. Not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but worth just making a nod to those benefits that I know cost everyone a lot of money. They're very expensive. Inherently, they carry a lot of value. And what we think might happen in terms of costs from a group life, group income, and I know we'll touch on PMI as well, Charlotte.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things jumped out here was just that the percentage of COVID claims, isn't it? Nearly 8% was a lot higher than I expected, given that these are group schemes rather than personal schemes. But I think the types of claims coming through are similar. But we've been hearing from the providers in the life assurance market in particular that they're not expecting huge increases, because this is in line with what they were expecting. I think group income protection is always a little more difficult, and obviously both of these depend very much on your own claims profile. Same with PMI, we're probably seeing the claims start to increase more sooner than we expected. I guess the vaccine's been rolled out quicker than everyone expected, so some of those treatments have opened up, and the private hospitals have opened up for treatments more quickly. But I think it's fair to say that particularly on income protection, we're not seeing yet the impact that the pandemic has had on things like musculoskeletal and mental illness, as well as cancer, where we're hearing that there's been obviously delays in diagnosis because there's that sort of 6-month deferred period. And in fact, because I think you're going to have people who are working now who, if you were in an office, probably wouldn't be working, but they feel they can because they're at home, or they're managing that because they're at home. So I think we're not seeing the true output. But what I would say on this is that, what our corporate benefits team in particular are looking at and working on is how are we making sure you've got the cover, particularly within a PMI scheme, that works for you, for example, particularly in that mental illness space, but also to get the providers working together. We're doing a lot more of that now, so that you've got what's happening on PMI, where's the early intervention from group income protection, etc., to try to stop these claims coming through as a huge value, obviously through income protection and then potentially into life assurance.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think, obviously there's lots of talk about, are the insurers profiting, through the lockdowns when people couldn't access private healthcare? Now that's almost reversed, from a PMI point of view, where the NHS is in, a bit of a state in terms of waiting lists. So you would expect demand and claims through PMI, potentially to go through the roof. So is that where you see sort of the biggest risk and the thing that people should monitor the most closely?
Yeah, I think that's the one where you usually get the most volatility, right? Especially, I mean, obviously the larger schemes get it a little less, but that's where there'll be the volatility. So I think keeping close to your claims data, looking at what people are claiming for and how quickly that's going up is really important. So, don't wait until you've got that 9-month claims and renewal terms to look at the data, which I'm sure a lot of you don't anyway. But if you push your providers and your consultants to provide that early. I know our corporate benefits team are doing an awful lot of sort of proactive work around looking at that claims to try to give some early indication of what those rate increases might be.
Yeah, okay, great. So just to touch on again, hopefully it doesn't feel like we've even scratched the surface of all the data we have to hand and all the things they tell us. But I think what's clear, is hopefully the data proves that what is happening from the employee engagement point of view is reflecting what's happening in wider society and the pressures and the focus points we're seeing across the board. So in terms of thinking about how you develop benefit schemes going forward, thinking about actually, what matters to me as an individual, what are the things in the wider world that are happening that are going to be placing strain on the workforce, and using that as a jumping off point when thinking about the strategies you need to put in place actually doesn't seem like a bad first approach. I think it's fair to say. Would you agree with that, Charlotte?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely agree.
Cool. So we wanted to end it with 5 tips for people to go away and think about. I think what's clear is there is no one size fits all when it comes to customers or employees. So actually making sure that you have an appropriate mix of benefits across the board, both those that can be accessed and utilized straight away and those that are a bit more preventative is kind of key. We've talked a lot about that communication piece, and really the next 3 points on this slide are all about communication. So is the content easy to find? Is it all in one place? If someone has a well-being question or wants well-being information, do they know where to go? Is there one place for that? And then, do you really understand, your employees? Because the data shows the different segments, whether you look at the demographic by gender or salary or industry, everyone has different needs and are engaging in slightly different ways. So understanding your demographic first and foremost, and then what they need by communicating with them, asking them exactly what they think about their benefits, what's missing, what's not, is really critical. And then making sure that once you've put all that in place, that you tell them, and you tell them specifically, if you want to boost engagement with the females in the organization, then why not put together, a more female orientated communication? I think it's that sort of personalization and individualization that people need to embrace in order to really sort of break down that diversity and inclusion piece. And then just sort of say, I think Charlotte and I have both reflected on the fact that, we get inundated literally on a weekly basis with people coming to us with new benefits, new solutions, that they want to launch in the market. And probably to an extent that we've never seen, such a rate of change and innovation. So we'll continue to surface the things that we think have got legs. We've got a fairly rigorous sort of procurement and review process before we put anything in front of our customers. But I think bearing in mind the changing pressures on the workforce, changing demographics, keeping an open mind, as to what people might be interested in is quite critical. Because I think through this process, through the past couple of weeks of Charlotte and I working through the reams and reams of data, it's challenged some of our long-held beliefs around what people are interested in and who those people might be. And then I'll just say, again, there's so much data we have at our fingertips within Benefex. We're happy to provide, the benchmarking data that we have. But also, I just remind you that everyone that's on One Hub has access to their own dashboard. So in terms of finding out what your employees are doing, how different demographics, different offices, different locations are interacting and engaging with the platform, it's all at your fingertips. It's readily available. If you don't know about dashboards or you need a refresher on how to use them, please speak to either your customer success representative or your consultant, who will happily walk you through them. And in a similar fashion, if you want some help interpreting that data and understanding what it might be telling you, again, your consultants and your CSDs are the first point of call, and we'd love to help you with that. But that's it for today. If anyone does have any other questions, please feel free to contact either myself or Charlotte directly, or like I say, via your CSD or your consultant, and we will make sure we come back with any answers. We'll also share a subset of the data that we looked through, both the stuff we've covered and probably some bits that we did manage to get to as well. So you have that as food for thought. And hopefully this is a jumping off point and gets you thinking about what your own data might look like and what it means in terms of having to adapt your approach going forward. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for joining, and look forward to speaking to you all in the future.